Very good. So, welcome to this course on Flowback in Whitson Plus. My name is Matthias Carlson, and I'm going to actually hand it over to my colleague James McDonald here today. The last few years, just before we get started, questions we get very frequently about Whitson Plus is like, can you use hourly data? What do we do with separated data that's not stock tank data, and how can we use this data for like early time interpretations, monitoring productivity changes as a function of, for instance, choke changes, and how can you use it to, for instance, estimate initial reservoir pressure? And those are topics we thought it would make sense to cover in a dedicated course. So that's why I got my colleague here, James McDonald, that will walk you through a lot of this. Hopefully, for many of you, I'm sure it's the first time you use flowback data in Whitson Plus, so it might be a lot of new things. And if you've done a lot of this, I'm sure it will be a combination of a little bit of a repetition, and hopefully that you're hammering down on a couple of new things as well. So with that, I'll leave the word to one of my absolute best friends, James McDonald.
Oh, thank you, Matthias. Thanks everyone for joining. I know before we jumped on to get the recording going, we asked everybody to create their project and just go through the steps. I'm also going to do it with you live here in a few minutes so that if you missed creating your project or there's any problems and you want to make sure that you follow along and actually click on everything as well, we want you to do that as well. So I'll make sure I cover that and I'll go through the steps doing it with you also. Excuse me. So, but before then, few talking points. So one, here's that slide that shows the steps of creating your own project, just so you have the same information that I have as we're going through. A little bit, just a couple of minutes of just getting a couple of things. I'm going through a lot of what Matthias talks about before every course that we host here at Whitson. Just, we host a lot of these courses, a lot of these trainings, and the one that we're doing today is the flowback. So being able to analyze flowback, make sense of flowback data, trying to understand what the reservoir and the completion is trying to tell us in regards to that those early flowing conditions. But you can see that we are hosting a number of small courses here throughout the year. So just nice to put up the list here to show you what's coming up. And for anything that you want to register for, make sure that you get an invite for, so we create your login and a password for you. Just email old Mr. Carlson himself. You see the email at the bottom, and let him know which courses you'd like to partake in, and you'll get an email back and reminder to join whenever it's coming up. So a lot of good courses here coming up. So I really like the approach that Whitson has taken, trying to knowledge share. I'll say knowledge shares in general as much as they do, from the sessions that they host, like the virtual sessions, to the WhitCon, the big event coming up later this year, to all these short courses that we're offering. Just always trying to get the conversation going and get as many people to participate as possible. If you're interested in a certificate for this course or any of the courses that you attend, certainly let us know. In large part, it's also a way for you to be able to keep track in professional development hours especially if you're going for your professional engineering. So these professional development hours can be used to help accrue for that and maintain your status. So we certainly offer certificates for all of our courses. And from our website, so this is just a blur or a screenshot from our website, that we have a number of training available. In addition to the short courses that are free to all of our customers, we also have a number of other courses on our website. There's a lot of information there. So from all the PVT that really got companies started, right? Everything hosted from Mr. Curtis Whitson himself. So a lot of courses on our website, a lot of training opportunities. Certainly want to put our best foot forward in providing all the information that we can for anybody in the reservoir production engineering space. And it's funny, every course, every demo, this slide becomes more and more relevant of what our goal with Whitson is and is continuing to be enforced. My slide, I just changed the title to Color Production Data Analysis Toolkit. I like, even here it says it's an all-in-one solution, but they both mean the same thing. That Whitson becoming more and more just a tool where you can, anything that you want to do to analyze any type of data, we want you to be able to do in one place. And that's our goal. As you can see, that we've continued to expand into multiple disciplines in the, again, reservoir engineering, production engineering space. So a lot of ways to look at and make sense of your data. And then today we're covering, there isn't like an official module just for flowback, but you can certainly analyze flowback data. But we'll see where this conversation continues to take us as well. For your general support, very proud of how aggressive and how responsive the support at Whitson is overall. I would assume that a lot of people would agree and attest to that if you have questions, we've got people that are willing to jump on the line spend some time with you, help you along, or just even answer a quick question on email if need be. So from writing any direct contact that you have at Whitson, or submitting a ticket or request through the application itself, very easy to get a hold of somebody on our side for any help that you might need as you're using the software, for whatever reason you're using the software. I keep forgetting about those little cartoons that we've gotten here. So now we're getting into my slides. So now I know what's coming. I won't be surprised. So I'll cover the agenda here. And then I'll jump into creating that project with everyone, and then I'll come back to the slides for a couple more talking points, and then we won't go back and forth too much. We're going to spend certainly the vast majority of our time in the actual application, but I will, shortly after describing what we're going to talk about, go and then create that project just to make sure that we're all on the same page and all ready to go. So first of all, we'll just have a quick warm up, as Matthias always likes to warm up before getting into in depth. You don't want anybody to pull something, all right? You want to make sure that we stretch our brains accordingly. So just have a conversation about why we flow back our wells. Then we'll revisit, how the software handles high resolution data, and what Matthias mentioned as well, volumes that are recorded at the separator. We'll certainly dive into that in depth. Some of the things that we can learn about the reservoir, and one of the things that becomes very important, and it's a great opportunity and a great time to do it, is estimating your initial reservoir pressure. We'll visit that topic also. And then we'll get into really kind of the majority of the course, and probably the biggest purpose why a lot of people are here, and things that you can do with your data, and how we can monitor and analyze this flowback data to gain something, gain some value, gain some understanding with this very early aspect of the life of our wells. That's our agenda. I'm going to X out of here. We'll do a quick refresh. You can see a number of people already have some projects created in here now. If you're following along, and I'm assuming most people probably have their projects, but if you're following along and you clicked on the fields page, which is where you would be at first, starting off, you wouldn't see all the stuff that I see here with my support account, but you would see this Flowback in Whitson field. Clicking on that will bring you to your projects page. I'm going to go ahead and click on add a new project. So that's certainly in the steps. So go ahead and add a new project. I'll just call this hit save, and it'll immediately bring me into, then all we're asking you to do here is go ahead and click on the mass upload, and then go to the examples tab at the end. In here, we added the flowback well that we're going to analyze today. So go ahead and upload that. I'm trying to slow down, realizing I went through those steps a little bit quickly, so I'm just trying to slow down as I'm doing this. Go ahead and click upload this. So thank you, Jenna, again for bringing it up. We're going to talk about this here a little bit more in a couple of minutes, but make sure that you say yes to this question. You can see in the back, it already told me, like, all right, we have already created the conversion process. And as soon as you X out of this window and then go to this well's production data, just on the left-hand side, this is on the production tab for that well. Everybody should be able to see a screen similar to mine. So I'll give that a second, and I'll just see if there's any questions that come up in the chat about creating this, assuming everybody's okay. And I think, yeah, everybody can speak, so it seems like anybody can just unmute if they have any questions. Perfect. Okay. Continuing on with the slides, there's the little warm-up, and I kept that in there, Matthias. I used Matthias's a slide from a previous course as my template to create these slides. So there's some things that I certainly kept on purpose, including Nocha Libre here. So as an introduction, why do we flow back our wells? It's not a full list. This list of reasons that you flow back and what you're hoping to gain could certainly cover probably a half dozen slides. So don't beat me up for leaving some things out, but I'll bring up a couple of key reasons, key points, and a lot of the points that relate to how we're going to cover the flowback data today. But one, well integrity and mechanical performance. Just make sure that there isn't anything physically wrong with the well, right? Before we bring it on any kind of long-term production, just be able to check all of our jewelry and all of our information, the casing and tubing and everything about our wells. So just a very simple way, jump in, like just to check how the well's doing itself. Fluid and sand monitoring. So one, remove the excess completion fluids, contaminants, and debris, just cleaning up the well, right? We're doing that early cleanup. Get rid of the stuff that we wouldn't want to necessarily send down the main line. Monitoring and keeping track of our proppant and or sand production. So make sure we're not producing too much sand for, again, once we get rid of all of our surface equipment and all the gear that's able to handle all of this, that we don't have too much sand production. Ideally, I'd say no sand production, but we don't have too much sand production that could damage any of our equipment. Manage our flowback and water disposal, recycling. So just deal with the excessive early water production that we're getting. So maybe it's too much for a lot of what we would have. So just in whatever your treatment of that flowback fluid is. Monitoring change in phase behavior. One, we want to establish that we've got kind of more of a stabilized water cut. reach to and a volume of water that is, again, that we can handle without any problems. Then the one that's more interesting here is the GOR, right? So hopefully establish more of a stable GOR, and there's nothing crazy going on with their gas oil ratio. It's a topic that we'll talk about more as we get deeper into the course today, but just an understanding of our phase behaviors. So then we get into more of the well performance. So establishing our initial rates, right? And a lot of times we'll assume we'll reach our peak rate, so we know what is the maximum rate that we could expect. Again, make sure that we can handle whatever's coming out of the well, but establishing our initial rates, and then an estimate of, and we'll certainly dive into this a little bit deeper, estimating our initial reservoir pressure. So the during flowback is a great time, arguably the best time, to get an insight into what that initial reservoir pressure is. So we'll talk about a couple of different ways that we can learn that from our data with our flowback information. The insights as to how successful our completion actually was, right? So the hydraulic fracturing success, the reservoir connectivity, so we can get some early insights as to how successful our completion actually was. The analyzing pressure drawdown trends, so the depletion behavior that we see while we're looking at our data early on can certainly help teach us about what we can expect further down the road. A good topic for us to discuss. And the last one here, as I put a question, because everyone wants to answer the following question: how successful were we at gently bringing the well online as aggressively as possible? I had fun putting that one in there. But that's always the goal, right? Did we hurt anything while we were flowing our well back? So can we look at the data and understand if there was anything there about being too aggressive on the well? But at the same time, we don't want to lollygag. We want to get this thing up and running, cleaned up, and onto our long-term production as soon as possible. So we'll talk about this comes up just kind of as a general conversation point as we're going through. But so this is the list that I came up with just for why we flow back our wells. Everything from just being able to check the physical performance of all the equipment and everything that we have, all the way to what are we trying to learn from the data to help understand more about the reservoir and make sure that we're making the right choices before we would call it quits and then we're done with our flowback and we put this well onto long-term production. So we're going to visit this very quickly as soon as it'll be the first thing that we look at in the software. But I thought it'd be a good time to just dive into this a little bit there now about dealing with the actual flowback data with a couple of slides. Excuse me. So when you're dealing with flowback data, you can see I just put a screen. This is actually the data from the well that you're looking at. But first and foremost, you're tend to deal with high resolution data. So we have hourly data for the well that we're looking at here today. We can certainly handle, really it's just to point out that you can handle high resolution data in Whitson. Just go ahead and then put in whatever resolution data that you have. But when it comes to flowback, it tends to commonly be hourly data. So you can see that in the green shade. And then the other side is what Matthias had mentioned at the beginning, and we'll talk about here at length, and I'll show you again more in the software, is that oftentimes we're dealing with separator recorded volumes. So that becomes important. And where it becomes important, and this is what I was saying at the beginning, Jenna, I put a screenshot of that window, which for a lot of people might have been the first time that they see this message in the software. And we're just telling you that, hey, the software detected that you entered separator rates, not stock tank. Do you want us to go ahead and do our job as to why a lot of, why are we paying for the software? Let's be able to handle and do things like this for you. You can see with the sorry, I got a little bit lost in my notes as well. I made some notes on my side just so I make sure I cover everything as much as I can, as efficiently as possible as we're going through. Yeah, so there we go. So then the software will ask you if it will tell you that your separator rates were detected. So what are the things that you need to be able to account for this, to essentially convert your separator recorded volumes into stock tank conditions? Well, first and foremost, you need an equation of state model, which is what the software already comes with. For a lot of you, I'm sure you're probably aware that we have our default equation of state model, but we also have equation of state models that are tuned to a lot of the liquid rich areas and specific regions that people are operating in. But first and foremost, you need that equation of state model. You need a PVT sample, and that's part of what this messaging is telling you, that if you don't have a PVT sample to go off of, well, then the software will look at your production data and then generate a sample that it will use for you. You need your separator conditions, so that's what this cartoon is showing. You got your separator rates and conditions in here, and with that, and there's a little bit more that goes into this, and I just showed one aspect of the results that you get, but I'll say voila, we're able to calculate your separator shrinkage. We got your flash factors that we calculate, and we'll show all you this in the software. But in the end, what it ends up giving us is taking those separator conditions, the separator volumes, and then converting those to your stock tank values. So you can see I need to just point out to a couple of them that our separator rate for oil rate here got converted from 311 down to about 250 barrels. Our separator for our gas went from 5846 up to 636 MSCF. And the big message here is that if you have separator recorded volumes, you don't want to just import them into the tool as your stock tank information. You want to make sure you do this conversion. That if I brought these values in, especially for an oil well that I'm looking to analyze, I could certainly be assuming that my well is 20, 15% more productive than it actually is, right? And that's the big caution. And you certainly get the kind of the bigger wake-up call down the line if you're analyzing the well with these as your primary rates. After the well comes online, you realize that it's not flowing as well as you were expecting to from whatever predictions you were making from your flowback data. So again, we'll see this here in the software. So we're going to go jump to the software right now. So then from the production page, and this is where I left everybody off a second ago. So from your production page, if everybody's on this well, just go ahead and click on production data, and that should bring you right here. If I just go ahead and then click on the separator oil shrinkage, you can see where I grabbed one of those cartoons. And again, the software is doing a lot of this work for you. And there's certainly some finaglings that you can apply and play with in here, but we're showing you. So here's the calculated separator oil shrinkage, all right, for every single point in your flowback, calculating that shrinkage for it. Here's your flash factor that we can see. The conditions that we imported that we need from your separator, what was the temperature and pressure for every single point, calculating a total GOR. So it's nice that it's just showing you all this information that's in here. And if I go back, so that's, and these two tabs at the top, for a lot of people, they might not have seen those in the software before. They only show up if you're actually importing your flowback information or your separator information. Your volumes recorded as separator, and again, that window shows up and the software tells you like, hey, we detected separator conditions. You want us to convert those to stock tank for you? And then these extra tabs show up for you to be able to look at the data and see what the software is actually doing with it. So if I go back to my production tab and I scroll down, I can see in my history that I've got everything that I imported into the tool, and then it's also showing me what the converted or calculated stock tank rates were for us. So I'll pause there for a second, just see, because I know it's a big topic, and I'm not certainly the PVT whiz and master when it comes to a lot of this stuff, just familiar enough to be dangerous with it, right? Utilizing the software, doing a lot of the work for me. But if there was a little bit more, actually, let me check on the chat. I'm assuming Matthias is there, so he's probably answering as it's coming in. I just want to give an opportunity to ask some questions on this side of it. I think it looks like the questions are being answered as we're going through, but feel free, someone stop me, or somebody needs to jump on from our side or to answer anything that someone's bringing up, especially because I know this is certainly a big topic for the course. Just making sure that you're handling your fluids properly and you're happy with what the software is doing, or do you understand all the controls that you have and put your the best foot forward. So if we're good there, we've got our calculated stock tanks. The first thing we'd need to do is certainly just go down and continue on as you would any well that you would analyze in Whitson, especially anything rate transient analysis related or anything that you're trying to do with the pressures, is go and calculate then our bottom hole pressures. So go ahead and click on bottom hole pressure, and you can just go ahead and hit the button right now with me. So we say calculate bottom hole pressure. So now we just went ahead and did that. First and foremost, we certainly need to go and then select which pressure loss correlation we want to utilize. If you want to use something, don't get me wrong, this is a training course in the sense that you're here to learn and become more familiar with the tool, get more exposure to it. So there's nothing wrong with going clicking around whatever parts of the software you're trying to learn a lot more about, right? But I'll just guide you as to what I'm doing just to get through the analysis and the interpretation and everything. But again, feel free to navigate the software yourself. But I clicked on calculate bottom hole pressure, so now I'm going to go select pressure loss correlation for Waldesmite and Gahar as my primary. As you calculate bottom hole pressures in the software, I'm sure most of you are familiar because I kind of keep forgetting everybody here is a Whitson user. Right? So there's a lot of things I don't have to say, but I'm almost treating this like it's the first time for some people seeing the software. But you have the option of, we always calculate all of the bottom hole pressures using all of our correlations in the software. And then you can pick the primary one you want to use going forward as you continue to analyze your data. So, and there's not a whole lot to show in here, but I was just going to bring up that the well card is where you store your well information. So here's your deviation survey. The top and bottom are your perforated interval. In the well data tab is where you'll have all of your casing information. Again, this well's just flowing up casing is very simple. If I had a change to my flow path, right, if I had tubing in the well, then it would open up additional drop downs. If I had an artificial lift method, I would have my choices there. And then depending on the artificial lift method that I have, there's often additional conditions that I can choose. So walking through and setting up your wellbore, very convenient, but very important as well. I like to say that we have a kind of an established unconventional reservoir workflow for analyzing production data, call it the RTA workflow. Those first two steps are make sure your PVT is right, make sure you have confidence in your bottom hole pressures, and really means that 40% of that workflow has been complete as long as you can get to this step. The other three are just analyzing the data and making sense of that. But the vast majority, or a very big part, very important part of any production data analysis that you're performing is, again, having confidence in the fluids that you're analyzing and confidence in the bottom hole pressures that you're calculating going through and performing your analysis. So there's nothing to do in here. This was just kind of a quick highlight. As a lot of you are probably aware, and even for that question that came up, we did a manual upload of the information into here for this well, but for a lot of you, you actually have this information being brought in automatically into your environment. Which includes not just your production data, but bringing in your wellbore information, your artificial lift information into the tool, and having the software automatically calculating your bottom hole pressures for you, right? So certainly a setup that's been very valuable for us. For a lot of companies, it's been a reason to migrate early to Whitson, and then you get the benefit of performing whatever type of analysis to the wells on top of that. So we've got our bottom hole pressures calculated. Here at this point, I selected that pressure loss correlation, the Wallace Mine Gahar. So then we get into the topic of, this is a great time to talk about initializing your, or getting some kind of an understanding of what your initial reservoir pressure is. So I put a slide to talk just about, and it's just a single slide. So estimating your initial reservoir pressure, because there's really two methods beyond guessing what it is, and then beyond guessing what it is, and beyond maybe assuming like a pour point pressure gradient. For yourself, or something a little bit more in depth. Two things that you can do. One, and I took these screenshots right from, well, I took this screenshot right from a video that I'll talk about here in a second, but from the late, great, may rest in peace, Steve Jones, wrote a great paper on trying to get an estimate of your initial reservoir pressure from your early flowback. And then we were kind of using this as a guide, and Matthias describes this very well in his Tip Tuesday videos available on our, that's why I put these on here, available on our YouTube channel. So Tip Tuesday 118 it goes through a good description of using this method, but really essentially means that if you have flowback data where you're just flowing back water for a while before you get hydrocarbon breakthrough, so HBT means hydrocarbon breakthrough, that point where you actually start seeing that hydrocarbon breakthrough tends to correlate very well with an estimate of initial reservoir pressure for your bottom hole pressures. So the bottom hole pressures at that point. So that's a very clean and easy way to look at your data and try to get something that's a very reasonable assumption for an initial early reservoir pressure. If you don't, and this is actually a screenshot that came from this well set, if the data looks familiar, there's a reason for that. But if we have a flowback that looks similar like this, where we don't have that water production before we break through, well, then there's another method in the tool, essentially using the IPR method. We'll call it the IPR method, and we'll do this in the software here together in a second. But you can see what it's doing is that you're plotting an IPR calculation. So we have the rolling shell herd, or the CNN, for gas wells, and then we use the Vogel here for oil wells, where you're just putting this deliverability calculation through your early data and then back calculating it to get an estimate of initial reservoir pressure, which also tends to work very, very well. I hadn't seen this method myself before coming to Whitson or being used, and since then have used it on probably a dozen different environments with clients on a number of different wells, and it's done a great job of being pretty accurate to help us estimate, again, those early reservoir pressures. So to see that in the software, first and foremost, I'll say based on Stephen Jones information, there's a button here when you're in your bottom hole pressures, and it's a button I think a lot of people don't know is in there. And that's why I say feel free to click everywhere in the software. But there's a button here when you're in your bottom hole pressure, so you don't have to go back to the production data tab. That'll just show you your rates and pressures here. So you while you're on the bottom hole pressure tab, you can just click this button here, and you see can your rates pop up. So I don't actually have any flow with just water before the hydrocarbons break through. But if we assume that maybe my hydrocarbons didn't kick in until this point, really all we're saying is that look at what your bottom hole flowing pressures are until you get to that point where they start breaking through, and then that could be an early estimate as to what you should set your initial reservoir pressure. right? So we put the initial reservoir pressure on just about every page as you're walking through the software. And this is where you can actually just change it or highlight it or see it yourself here. So that's the one quick method, which again, it's a great paper to read. Certainly recommend or encourage people to do that. And then the Tip Tuesday video is they're only about 3 minutes each. And Matthias just does a great job just covering what's important and looking at data with some better examples than what we're looking at here. The other method is the button that's right next to this one that we just clicked on, which is your estimate initial reservoir pressure tab here. So if you go ahead and click on that, you'll see a page that looks similar to mine. The default here is to show information for the first 10 days. That's why so many data points are here. The goal is that when you're dealing with daily production, that we usually tend to people like maybe plotting your first 10 days or so is good enough, is all you need, because you really just want that early unbothered production. Unbothered meaning you're not seeing a whole lot of changes in your phase behaviors, your GORs or whatnot yet. So instead of a 10, let's change that to a 2 and just hit enter. So it'll cut out some of that data. And you can go and certainly fit a fit through here yourself. So we have the tools on the top right-hand side where you can use the spray gun or you can use the lasso to go and select your data. I'm just going to go click on the auto fit. So you can click on that as well. And you can see what it does. It tries to best fit the data through the data yourself. I'm just going to bring this up so you can see exactly what we're showing you, that we are using the Vogel equation again, so deliverability equation to best fit the data, and then backcast that to an estimate of initial reservoir pressure. Right, very convenient, very easy to use method. And if you're happy with that, so now instead of an 83, we have about an 8,100 pound initial reservoir pressure. So if we're happy with that, go ahead and hit save. And then that updated, you can see this jumped a little bit. So the average reservoir pressure, or the initial reservoir pressure that we plot on this plot, moved down a little bit. That's the new initial reservoir pressure that we have here. And even if you went back to our PVT, just take a look at that. It's been updated here also. So at this point, we've got our PVT, we've got our separator volumes converted to stock tank. We've got our bottom hole pressures calculated. We did a quick estimate on initial reservoir pressure, so we've already covered a lot in a very short period of time here, which is good because beyond this point, now it's time to just start doing stuff with data. So we're looking at a single well there now, and obviously the well that we're looking at here. So we're just going to go through some of the steps that could be valuable that you want to look at. Include some of the tools that are already here that you're already familiar with, right? The flow material balance, analytical RTA. So we'll go ahead and spend some time on both of these. So if you go ahead and click on the flowing material balance tab, go ahead and hit run. So anytime an analysis is being performed for the first time on flow material balance, you'll always have to hit that run button. And here's what this flowback data looks like on our flow material balance. So the goal of flow material balance is, tends to be first and foremost to give you an estimate of how much reservoir you've actually contacted. And then seeing a signal like this could be, very common when you're looking at a lot of flowback data, because as your slope gets shallower and shallower, we're seeing more, and you can see the numbers here change. We're seeing more and more. So as a very quick and early indication, something you can compare from well to well, looking at your data with just flow material balance and what the multi-phase flow material balance in this case can start giving you estimates as to how much contacted reservoir you've seen during your flowback. So very quick, very easy, but very valuable information, and something maybe keep track of. So I've got roughly about 300,000 barrels that I've contacted so far before this flowback ended. So just really convenient, very easy, and then even seeing the shape of it. Right, just the shape of your data and see what that looks like. It's got that curvature coming forward, bending over slowly as time goes on, just being a bit of an indicator for you that we're seeing a little bit more and more reservoir. Now, a lot of you that are dealing with wells, especially oil wells, especially volatile oil wells, are probably familiar or aware that interpreting your flow material balance can have not its challenges, but has some things that you want to be aware of. If you start seeing a lot of multi-phase behavior and you reach saturation early on in the life of the well, that can start playing games in the data for you. We won't get too far into depth on that right now, but when you see a nice clean signal early on, it's nice to have that the ability to have some confidence in what this is telling you. So just very quick look at the data, something we can learn something very quick from. So again, is an estimate of a contacted volume very, very quickly, and something that becomes very valuable is either a number or the shape of this data. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, that you can compare for multiple wells. The next tab down here is our analytical RTA, and I'll just go ahead and then highlight first and foremost the square root time plot. I'll expand that just to make that the whole side of my screen. And just in case there was anybody kind of mentioning and saying the words, like, yes, I am very well aware that this is arguably the cleanest flowback data set in the history of all flowbacks. So it is giving a lot of what we would consider the ideal answer, right? Ideal way to look at data. But that being said, it's always nice to know what you would expect to see if there weren't any problems or big issues with your data set, especially not just the data itself, but what is the reservoir trying to tell us and teach us. But I've got some more examples that I'll bring up here to do some comparisons later. So this is very typical of what you'd expect to see on a square root time plot early on, right? We got that really kind of early flow and it steps down a little bit, usually until you establish some kind of a trend. And then that trend that you establish is ideally something that's not going to get worse in time, right? So if I was to put this line through this data and just call this whole thing kind of a straight behavior, not a whole lot of people would argue with me. But then the things that you can learn from looking at your data on this plot would be, does the well at any point improve? So let me just bring that back down. Does the well improve at some point? Are we continuing to investigate more reservoir more aggressively than just assuming that we're on that same infinite acting path, which could then turn into something that looks like the well got better, so maybe the slope keeps getting even shallower? Or are we seeing something that's maybe detrimental and hurting our well? So if we had a sudden change in behavior that either saw a reduction in that slope, right? So while I'm saying reduction and increase, I'm always looking at this A root K number. So then that A root K representing how much, how effective our completion actually was and our ability to actually flow this well back. So then anything that's more shallow is going to be a reduction in that number. Anything that's going to be a betterment is going to be an increase in that number. So that's just a quick way to see how your data is behaving through time. Ideally, whatever trend you establish early should hopefully be the trend that you continue to stay on, but that's not always going to be the case, and I'll show you some examples here in a little bit. And then even something that you can see in your data can often be like a step change. So your data jumps, right? So you might even be on a similar trend, but what's it telling you whenever it has some kind of a jump, right? And we always talk about how if you have a positive, call it a B or a B prime, or just a positive point on your y-axis, that can relate to more of a skin. So maybe it's just having there's a bit more of a barrier that was created. The well's having a hard time of effectively overcoming that barrier and into the wellbore and then up the well. So there's certainly a number of things that you can learn from looking at just this plot. The ideal situation would be probably something that looks like this, but you could certainly see a departure from that line up or down. So we're better or worse, or even just a step change. So the things that you can pick up on your data, depending on what you're seeing, could mean one thing or another. But it becomes a very commonly used plot to look at your flowback data just to see how the well is behaving and how performing. So again, I'll just mention the thing I said at the beginning, often seeing some of these step changes early on, right, where it kind of like jumps down slowly. It's almost like the well's really cleaning up and you're starting to establish your rates until it gets to a more of a stabilized performance tends to be what you'll see, and then what you're hoping to ideally will stay on that trend, unless the well gets better. So when it comes to tools that we have in the software that people tend to look at very commonly when you're looking at flowback data and make sense of it, beyond your PVT to convert your stock tank, convert your separator to stock tank, calculating your bottom hole pressures, estimating your initial reservoir pressure, then the flowing material balance, and then the analytical RTA become very commonly used tools for just looking at some of the sections of the software that people are already pretty familiar with, right? So there's certainly some learnings there. But then one of the big aspects of using the tool is being able to look at your data, a lot of different parts of your data in one place, and then some place there you can compare multiple wells for a lot of these analysis techniques and behaviors in one place. And really what I'm alluding to, I'm using a lot of words to say, we can go to our comparison plot and go ahead and do that with me. So then the comparison plot here on the left-hand side, and then you can build your own custom plots to view what data you want to view in the way that you want to look at it. So and I put a cartoon in the slides as well, just to show what we're going to build together. And it's not the only plot that we'll look at together, but it's certainly one of the key ones. That would be very common that you would see a lot of people utilize in the software, a way to be able to conveniently look at all your flowback information in one place. So we're going to go build this plot together. It won't take that long. And it's good experience and good exposure to using the comparison plots in Whitson if you haven't spent much time there. We've spent a lot of time I'll say even the comparison plots have been in the software for a long time, and they just keep getting better. We keep improving on them, keep adding in new tools, new features to help us, which makes it then utilizing it for monitoring flowback data even more convenient than it was before. So to go ahead and then build our comparison plot, go ahead and click the add plot on the top right hand side, turn on your well. So we only have the one well that we're going to add in here. Go ahead and hit save. And now we're staring at a blank plot with our well list here on the left hand side. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and then add some data to it, or some data sets to it. So on the top left hand side, go ahead and click edit. We're just going to add one data set and then save it just so you can see what it looks like, and then we'll come and add some more. So let's say first and foremost, the first thing we want to see is our choke. So start typing in choke, and you'll notice, and maybe I went through that a little bit quick, when you just click on the tab, you get a number of categories of data you can choose from. And I admit it can be a little overwhelming for a lot of people first time using the comparison plot, because there's a lot of categories, and inside those categories, there's a lot of stuff. So one, I'll say the more time you spend in here, the more familiar you get with what's in here, but very valuable and very helpful is just if you have an idea of what it is that you want to plot. So if I wanted some kind of pressure normalized rate, we'll just start typing in the word and it'll start filtering for you, right? So then in this case, again, if I'm looking for choke, choke size here at the very top is the first one. Go ahead and click on that, hit save. And then if you're not seeing anything yet, same thing as me here. I don't actually have my well or whatever wells I want to see the information for turned on. Go ahead and click on my FB1, and then there's my choke size. If there's anybody, this is the first time using comparison plots, congratulations, you just built your first comparison plot. So we're certainly going to go add a bunch more to this. So go ahead and click on the edit again. So let's add a few more things that we certainly want to take a look at. So hitting the plus bottom at the bottom, hitting the plus sign here, you can continue hitting that and then adding more data sets to it. So the first one we're going to add now is going to be, let's also look at our bottom hole pressures. So start typing in bottom hole and then see bottom hole pressure here at the top. I'm going to add another, and this one I'm going to tell it I want to look at my oil rate. So just start typing in oil. Oil rate shows up here near the top. I'm going to add another data set, and now I'm going to take a look at my water rate. Go ahead and that one. And then there's one last one that we're going to take a look at. I think I just saw a question. I X'd out of it quick. I think it asked if these are going to be stock tank or separator. These will all be stock tank rates that we're looking for. And then the last one that's going to show up in the comparison plot. My gas oil ratio. So I can just start typing in GOR because we actually have it listed as a GOR in here for a data set. Go ahead and click on that. So now we've got a lot more jewelry for our comparison plot. Go ahead and hit save. So now you can see everything just popped up. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to see. For those of you that are familiar with the comparison plots, I shouldn't say comparison plots, any chart that we have in the software, the rules always apply and are always the same. That if you want to move the data for any one of the axes, right? If you hover where you see the double arrows on any side of any of these. So if you're in the middle, it's not going to show you anything. You can't click on anything here. But if I show the double arrows on either side of the axis, right, it'll append the data to the opposite side. So then I can kind of move that around and spread them out a little bit, just to make it a little bit easier for me to see. So I'm going to leave my choke here kind of near the top. My GOR, I'm going to grab that and pull that further down to the bottom. My oil rate, I'll bring that down a little bit as well. And my water rate, I'll also bring that a little bit, and I'll push my bottom hole pressures up a little. So this was just to separate these out. Now, don't get me wrong, it actually did a pretty good job of picking the colors for me, right? If I wanted to go back in and modify the colors to make it more representative of what you're looking at, say I can make my GOR a little bit more red instead of that deep pink that we're seeing, you could always go back to the edit. The x-axis by default, I didn't go to it because it's just plotting everything as a normalized time. So everything's starting at time 0, though I could certainly change that to a date time if I actually want to see the dates. And then in the layout and design section, for any of these is where I can go and then control the color for the line and or the marker, so the dot itself. And I'll give you a little shortcut because I don't think we have to spend too much time on this one here. But say if I wanted to modify just any one of these, and there are some shortcuts that we're showing you here, right? The hotkeys. So if you wanted to just go and look at changing the color of any one of these, if you're hovering over it and you're holding control on your keyboard, just click on then that data set and it'll bring up the edit window in the layout and design tab, and then it'll open up exactly what that color is. So then a little trick here too, right? If you have lines and you have markers on at the same time, If you link these on the right-hand side, and then you go and change the color for any one of these, and say I want to make it more of a deeper red color, go ahead and hit save. It'll change it for all of the markers. Just little time savers, right? Instead of having to go through and then finding that one for each individual color, for each category. So go ahead and hit save on that, and then that'll update it on our plot. So I knew spending is, I was anticipating spending about 5 minutes or so just building this plot and then talking about some of the niceties here. And I'm sure, and feel free to go bananas, right? And create, and we're going to create an additional plot after this as well. And I'll show you a little bit more, but just getting familiar, excuse me, with using the plot and creating your own custom plot becomes very important, not just for Flowback, but for a lot of the things that you're going to be doing, just analyzing production data in general. And there's a number of things that we've added in. I'll highlight those a little bit, and on some of the other plots as well. But this could be considered, a very common and standard combination of data sets that we're looking at when we're looking at Flowback data. So one, you can certainly see your choke bumps here through time early on. You can see the jumps in the oil rates and your water rates for every one of those choke bumps. Interesting is that, the water does get bumped every time, but we're not seeing a big sudden increase in our water anymore, which is a nice thing to kind of pick up on. On the oil, we can see where we've established kind of a peak rate here, so we're getting up pretty high, and they did let it flow a little bit longer before hitting the choke again, and didn't see that's a pretty decent increase, but it's telling us that we've done a good job of establishing a peak rate for our oil, which becomes very important in all of this, right? Establishing what we would consider kind of a peak rate that we've seen. And then our water is now, after kind of stable, being at a very high water oil ratio early on, is diminishing, and even didn't see that big increase or a big jump whenever we did that last choke bump here, and it's just kind of steadily declining. So it's nice to see that steadying off a little bit. Our drawdown overall, and I'll get into a little bit more detail, but our drawdown overall, certainly going to see some changes for every one of those choke bumps, right? So then keeping track of how much change in that pressure are we seeing for each subsequent choke bump is certainly important. But you can see how it seems like it's doing a pretty good job of stabilizing itself as well. And one big thing that's on this page that you certainly want to see, and for an oil well anyway that you're flowing back that you're looking at, is seeing that GOR remaining, like after we established kind of what our GOR looks like, it's got that nice stable aspect to it. So a very stable GOR. What you don't want is to get this thing to get too crazy with you too early on, where you start seeing a whole lot of gas coming out of solution really in the early life of the well, because that it adds a lot of complications and it starts telling you about the volatility of your fluid. But it could certainly be something that could, like if we're drawing really hard on our well and we're seeing a lot of gas coming out of solution early on, it's just making it a lot harder for that oil to flow. So it could be telling you that maybe we're trying to operate at a lower pressure than we need to, especially early on in the life of the well. The one thing that's not being shown in this plot, but it's certainly important, right? So I say establishing that peak rate, seeing your stabilized conditions, the water's kind of diminishing, your GORs are nice and flat. If on top of all that, and again, I'm not showing it on here, but we're also monitoring our sand production, and maybe the reason why this last bump was flowed for so long before finally realizing that, okay, we're probably near the end, is that they've established a sand production that they're happy with, or the sand production has gone away. And if our sand production is in a good place, and then everything else on here, this could be looking at this like there's no reason to necessarily continue with this flowback, and then we could make the moves that we need to make to get this well onto long-term production. So again, very well aware this is a very clean, ideal, perfect case situation, kind of a flowback, but I'm assuming some of you have flowbacks that look probably as clean as this. The one thing I didn't do on here for you guys today, and I'll apologize, but it certainly becomes very valuable, is instead of just looking at the information, which is nice to be able to just kind of see some of the things that I pointed out, is you could certainly go ahead and then take a look at, yeah, I agree. What was that pressure depletion, right, for each one of these choke bumps, and just keeping track of that. So for this choke bump, what was my average rate? And then what was my change in pressure from this point to this point? And so what was my PSI per, call it PSI per hour average over this period of time? And then taking a look at that for every one of these is certainly something that I've seen people do, of actually getting numerical numbers from there. So you can certainly read an average oil rate, even an average water rate, and then what that change in pressure was for each one of those steps. And then kind of, and I'll say just list out or build a table that kind of shows some of that information as well. So all the information is here, very easy to get, take a look at it. So this was the main plot that I wanted to bring up. And as you're bringing in new information, as you're updating the information, and if it's just happening automatically with Connected to Whitson, this plot will just get updated as you're bringing in your new information in. If you're staring at it and you know like a new point just came in, you might have to hit refresh on your browser. But then this is a plot you can have created, established, set up, and then you're just looking at your data being updated through time. So this is looking at your raw data. So this is just looking at a single plot. You have the option, you could create another plot, like a separate comparison plot altogether. So if I click on comparison plot, that'll bring me back to this main page. I could create a new plot, or from here, I can actually generate additional plots on this same view. So instead of looking at a single plot, I can go ahead and then create a 2x2 plot. Oh, I just saw the request. We're actually pretty close to the end, actually, for this right now. So let me just talk about these last plots, because I was actually going to bring up an example that I have. And I'll say that'll be the end of the main content, and then I can always hang around, and we can always hang around and talk a little bit more. So I can go and create some additional plots on here. And again, for the sake of time, that's why I created these. So I'm going to go back to my project. And again, for the people, we'll stop the recording after I'm done this part, so that the course itself is, but anybody that wants to hang around and then create some of these plots with me and then look at data or has some questions, we'll certainly have a Q&A session here near the end. So I'm going to go back to the projects, and I got my JM test that I created. And then in here, I have my comparison plot that I had created, and it's going to look exactly like yours on the top left-hand side. But I also have these other 3 plots, and they're very easy to create. I just didn't think it would be worth the time, right? But literally all I have here is my pressure normalized oil rate, and I'll show you what that looks like. So literally pressure normalized oil rate over material balance time. So it's looking at the same PNR data that you would see from the analytical RTA, or any time that you just want to look at a pressure normalized rate plot. And I did plot this on a log scale, right? And then the idea here, it could be that now if you're starting to look at flow regimes and flow behaviors, I could turn on a negative half slope, for example, hit save, and then see how my data looks on this plot. And I'm also pointing out something that might be new to some people, is that when you're looking at, so it depends what data you have or how you're creating your charts, that will determine whether or not you have options for adding additional analysis lines to it. But you can see when you create your pressure normalized rate plot, you can come in here and then add multiple slopes. So if I had a rate normalized pressure plot, then everything would be the opposite way. So then maybe these positive slopes make more sense, but you can add multiples of these as well. So I wanted to point that out to make sure everybody's aware that this is kind of a newer addition to comparison plots, being able to add these slope lines on here. What I created here was that exact same thing that we had seen on the analytical RTA. This is our square root time plot, right? So this is our square root time plot. So I just went the normalized oil rate. I'll just show you oil rate normalized pressure over the square root of material balance time for oil. So again, they're just very easy things that you can just turn on and create on here. And then what I also turned on was a replication of the flowing material balance. So this is actually the flowing material balance, and you can see in this case, we've got the mass rate. So for this, the trick is just type in mass, M-A-S-S, and then all the options under that show up. But the mass rate normalizes density change, and then the mass material balance time, and then you've got your flow material balance here. So I took this the same data set, and then I made some changes to it to kind of show some of the behaviors that you could expect to see in your data. So one, if my GOR took off from me, and so I had a reduction in my oil rate as well, that's what this well is going to represent. So I'm just going to turn that on so you can see that my GOR, which still isn't crazy because this is still only about 4,000 scuffs per barrel, right? But it looks very drastic. But you can see the effect of this, and what I did was just drop down. Let's say my oil wasn't able to hold on anymore, and I'm just worsening through time. Well, what effect does that have when I'm looking at it on any of these plots, right? So on my square root time plot, I could see that departure, and it's going up, right? So I've left that initial trend that I have, and now it's just getting worse. On my pressure normalized plot, and it's the purple one here, so I'll just highlight that. You can see it. So now I'm getting away from my trend, and I'm dropping down and to the right, away from that initial trend, right? And then on my flow material balance, it's certainly telling me that I've got a different in slope than what I was expecting to see, that the reservoir, I'm not seeing as much reservoir, and I'm not behaving similar as I was early on. So it's just interesting to be able to quickly see and then compare a worsening of the ability of the well's oil production would look like when comparing it to, again, our previous trend, but being able to look at it at the same time. So then I had this other case where I said, well, let's assume that all of the production rates are the same, but I had to draw the well down even harder to be able to achieve those rates. So then if I had an increased drawdown, right, and you can see it on my plot here, so I made my drawdown significantly worse, noticeably worse, to be able to achieve the same rate, and then the effect that that has on, then again, all of my plots. So in this case, it's saying I'm still draining the same amount of reservoir. Maybe there's a slightly different slope here, but it's interesting to see that delta, right? That big jump. So this is something I'm sure people have seen on their flowback data when they're looking at it on a square root time plot. Everything's fine. We do a choke bump, and then boom, it jumps up, and there's like a delta compared to the previous trend, but it seems to be still on that same trend. Very convenient to be able to see that on here. The same effect that now has on our pressure normalized rate plot, right? That big jump, so that additional delta required to achieve that same rate. And then the effect that also has on our flow material balance. It kind of shows like it's still following a similar-ish trend. It's just harder for it to get there in the same amount of time. So I could even turn on all three of these, and just to quickly show and then be able to see these comparisons, right? So just highlighting one over the other, what these effects have, and let me scale that one back a little bit. Oh, now it moved everything around. But I wanted to take the same data set, the same well that we had, and then make parts of it behave differently or worse, so you can see what the effect would be when looking at that data or looking at this data a number of different ways, which again are all plots that you can easily create, plots that you can create and save as a template, so you're not recreating them whenever you're applying them to another well or a future well. And then just highlighting the ability for you. So let's say these are all different wells. You could have 5 or 6 different wells on here, all the wells from a pad, put them all on here, and then look at all of these trends, all of this information in one place very conveniently. This was everything that I wanted to cover as it relates to Flowback and the Flowback here today. So as a quick recap, we talked about as soon as you bring in your information, right? If you're bringing in separator information into the tool, you want to convert those down to stock tank. We do that through our process of properly accounting for the shrinkage and then calculating your stock tank barrels, right? And a lot of information. These two extra sections show up whenever you give the software separator information. We talked about bottom hole pressure. Calculating your bottom hole pressures, your wellbore certainly becomes important, but then the additional methods for getting an estimate of initial reservoir pressure. So if we didn't have any hydrocarbon production early on, just water, where the hydrocarbons break in, that could be a good opportunity to get an estimate of initial reservoir pressure, or using the IPR method that we highlighted here, right? So very, very valuable. And then for doing analysis on individual wells, the flow material balance, take a look at that. And then the analytical RTA to look at establishing our trends. And then we jumped right into the comparison plot of looking at a lot of the data and a lot of this information in one place. And you notice that even say on that square root time plot, one of the things you can do is actually turn on the analytical RTA. So whatever interpretation you put on that well when you are on the analytical RTA tab, you can click on here and it'll actually turn on those slopes, so you can see those slopes in here as well, right? So then I can turn off the wells and just leave the slopes there. I might have just lied to you. There. So that's what I wanted to cover. I'm sure as you're looking at flowback data on your own wells in your own environments, right? Questions could come up, interpretation, or what you think you might be seeing in data, or what the data is trying to tell you. It's a great opportunity to reach out to us, schedule a time. Myself, Matthias, Mo, Teja, Felix, we have a number of people on hand that can help navigate the software, look at some trends, and then try to help make sense of what the data is trying to tell you. Right? Tried to highlight a couple of things you could see in your data here. But this is certainly what I want to cover today, and I'd like to thank everybody for. I think we could probably stop the recording. I don't even know if I can stop it, but for anybody that wants to jump on and keep talking, even create some of these plots, I'm certainly available to hang around.